All right, and without further ado, Paige Manso.
Hi. For those of you who did not meet me last time, I'm Paige Manso. I'm a registered dietitian, and today we're going to be talking about how foods affect your body. Okay, so first we're going to talk about breaking down carbohydrates. Now, I'm not going to get all crazy and sciencey on you because that's not going to be helpful. Here's something I would like all of you to be informed about. At the end of the day, this is chemistry, right? So if you are breaking down the chemical makeup of glucose from a donut and the chemical makeup of glucose from rice, you're breaking it down the same way, right? However, the nutritional value and ingredients in those things can change the way your body responds. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you're digesting carbohydrates, it starts actually in your mouth. Okay. You're going to release an enzyme the minute it hits your tongue that starts the breaking down process. Okay. And then as you can see here, it's just going to go through the entire digestive tract. It's going to go down your esophagus, and it's going to be released into your stomach. You're going to go through the duodenum, the ileum, the jejunum. You're going to make your way all the way down until it makes its way back out. Now, the difference with carbohydrates that you should be aware of is that when glucose is released into your bloodstream, right, we're talking about blood sugar when you're breaking down carbohydrates. This is where certain things like pairing your carbohydrates with a protein and a fat can be super helpful, and choosing foods that have fiber in them. So when you eat a banana, your blood sugar is going to go up, right? Because it's just straight sugar. Even though it is like more of a natural and a healthy sugar, it's still sugar. If you were to eat a banana with nuts, your sugar is not going to jump as high because you're pairing it with a protein and a fat. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's good. Okay. Are there any other questions about breaking down carbohydrates? Okay. So let's talk about functions supported by carbohydrates. Low carb has been trendy pretty much my entire life, and I would assume many of yours. It's vital no matter what stage of life you're at. Like technically, if you had zero, and I mean zero carbohydrates, you would have a hard time surviving because carbs are the brain's preferred source of energy. There's so many different benefits to carbohydrates. So if you're like a low carb girly, I hope that this slide can teach you something today. Right? So I just said it's a brain's preferred source of energy. Now, technically, you would need a minimum of 120 grams of carbohydrates just for your brain. So a lot of the times when people go on a very low carb or ketogenic diet, they get what's called brain fog, when really it's just the fact that your brain has no energy because you're not eating carbohydrates. So it doesn't cause a fog, it just causes a lack of energy, right? And a lack of a fuel source. It's very important for exercise, right? Not only is it going to be the thing that's going to fuel your exercise, but it's also going to be the thing that helps you recover, okay? So when you think about when you were younger and your mom would give you a Gatorade when you were playing a sport, it's because Gatorade contains a lot of carbohydrates, and we use carbohydrates to give us energy. Or a lot of the times you'll see trendy bodybuilders online eating Rice Krispies before they work out, or eating Sour Patch Kids. It's all because you're going to utilize that sugar, and it's actually going to fuel your workout and make the workout better. Okay. Digestion. We're thinking about fiber here. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but even if you're a low carber and if you're eating any form of a vegetable or any form of a fruit, you're eating carbs. A lot of the time people are like, well, I'm keto and I'm eating an apple. It's like, well, then you're not keto because apples have carbohydrates. And without fiber, you're probably not going to poop very well, right? Fiber, there's two types of fiber, okay? There's soluble and insoluble. Soluble fiber slows you down, slows your digestion down, so it's going to bulk up your stool, and insoluble is going to sweep it on its way out. So fiber is going to be huge. Not only does fiber help you with going to the bathroom, but it's going to help you lower cholesterol levels and improve your blood sugar.
What is an example of each of the types of fiber that you just mentioned, the soluble and insoluble?
That's a great question. So when you're thinking of slowing down digestion and thinking of soluble, example right off the top of my head is oatmeal, right? Like oatmeal is kind of like a bulkier fiber. Whereas something like kiwi was going to be an insoluble fiber that's going to help you go to the bathroom. So a lot of the time when people are constipated, that's my first go-to is like, let's focus on insoluble fiber. Getting in fiber that's going to sweep you out. But a little fun fact, I guess, with kiwis, most of the fiber is in the skin. So if you're eating it skinless, you're not going to be getting as much of the fiber. So you're supposed to eat the skin. Even though, yeah, no, you don't have to be sorry. I know it's uncomfortable in your mouth, but honestly, you get used to it after a while. But yeah.
Just swallow. There we go.
No, I don't swallow it. I eat it like an apple.
Did we talk about cholesterol?
Yeah. Okay. So when you consume carbohydrates, right, like we just talked about, your body breaks it down into glucose. And we use glucose to literally fuel the cells in our body. Carbs are so important. Please don't be afraid to eat them. And of course, eating things like fiber is not only beneficial from a fuel standpoint, but from a nutrient standpoint, right? Think about it if you never ate fruits and vegetables. That's where all of your vitamins A, D, E, and K come from, all of your B vitamins, your C vitamins, all of your minerals come from. You'd be losing out on all of those different sources. And when you're going low carb, when your body needs energy, it's going to start breaking down your muscle to get it. So if you're somebody who's trying to get tighter or get toned, going low carb is really not in your favor because you're going to have to give up muscle in order to your body to have energy to keep functioning. So let's talk about recommendations for carbohydrates. Now, I'd like to make something clear. This is a very general recommendation, and this is not individualized. Typically, you would get a very specific recommendation based off of you. But today, we're just going to go over some general recommendations for carbs, okay? So like I had told you guys earlier, the minimum amount you should have is 130 grams. Now, for anybody who's ever counted carbs or who's ever tracked macros or anything, you'll know that most people are pretty low. So to need a minimum of 130 means that we definitely need more than that, okay? So I'm going to go over kind of just the dietary guidelines for Americans that are generally given, okay? So they recommend about 45 to 65% of your calories come from carbs. That's a lot, right? That's more than the majority of your calories. And the average person consumes 2,000 calories a day, or that's the recommendation, which would mean that your carb intake would be 225 to 325 grams of carbs a day, which is a lot. I don't know if you've ever eaten 300 grams of carbs a day, but that's quite a nifty serving. However, if you're trying to go low carb, okay, like for somebody who's pre-diabetic, your carbohydrate recommendations are going to be lower, right? Only 30 to 40%. So we're looking at between 150 to 200 grams of carbs a day. Honestly, I would say for anybody and everybody, I wouldn't go under 150. You're going to feel a lot better. You're going to perform better. Digestion is going to be better. And the quality of your life is going to be better because carbs are wonderful.
What would you say is like for example, how many carbs in an apple? How many carbs in a slice of bread? Just roughly.
Oh,
just to kind of.
Well, you're really quizzing me today.
Put in context. Or any
I want to
example.
say usually like a banana and an apple, it's going to be like 25 to 30 grams carbs for just like one apple or one banana.
Okay.
But yeah, it also depends on the size, right? If the apple's super small and the apple's super big, it's going to change the carbohydrate content. So that's also something to keep in mind too, that your serving size is going to change the carb intake. Now, if you are diabetic and you need to know how many carbs you're going to consume, it depends. It depends on what medications you take. It depends on how much insulin you are given. It depends on if you're on an insulin pump. And it depends on how sensitive of a diabetic you are. Certain diabetics can be super sensitive to carbohydrates, right? They eat one cupcake and their blood sugar is 400. Other diabetics can get away with a Super Bowl Sunday snack tray and only be around 300. So it really depends on all of those factors. I would say, honestly, if you are a diabetic, I would recommend talking to your endocrinologist about working with a diabetes educator. A diabetes educator is typically a registered dietitian who specializes in diabetes. They know all the different insulins. They can teach you how to track your sugars in your pump, and they can give you specific recommendations. Because also for diabetics, you're supposed to spread your carbs out evenly throughout the day. So let's just say hypothetically, you're allotted 45 to 60 grams a meal. You're not supposed to consume 200 grams of carbs in one sitting. So you're supposed to spread it out throughout the day. And then you have to take into consideration if you're snacking. So if you're snacking, then you have to take X amount away from your meals to compensate for the snacking. Does that make sense? Okay. Any questions so far?
I have a question.
Sure.
It's not me, but my husband, but he's not here. But he'll eat like one big meal a day. He's into this one big meal a day. And then after the big meal, because he works nights, so he'll have a big meal before leaving in the afternoon for work. And then in the evening, 9, 10 o'clock, it's like fruit and maybe like a protein bar. My question would be, then that's not good. He's really not spreading out the carbs the end of the day. Would it be better that he try to eat a little less and maybe have a meal maybe at 6 o'clock and then maybe his fruit at 9 o'clock? I'm just wondering, is that
Absolutely.
too much? Oh,
So I would,
because what happens, he tells me he feels very sleepy, but now he's to go to work. And he feels very sleepy after having that big meal, but he's preparing to go, to work and work so many hours.
yeah. So I think in a general recommendation, I would recommend spreading your food out throughout the day, regardless of what disease state you have, if you have any at all.
Yeah, he doesn't, surprisingly. But
yeah.
I'm the one who's more conscious, and I'm the one who has to watch things.
Yeah, I would spread out your calories throughout the day, definitely. And not only carbohydrates, but every food group, right? Like I would spread out your fiber, I would spread out your protein, not only for carbohydrate reasons and your blood sugar rising, but also metabolic reasons, right? When you go so many hours without eating, your body's like, okay, well, Lisa has no access to food, so let me turn down the metabolism to keep her alive. Your body doesn't know if you're standing in a kitchen with a full pantry of food, right? And another thing is his energy is so low because his blood sugar is getting too low, right? And then he's eating such a large amount that it's kind of a carb overload. And then you have the carb crash. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So he would probably feel a lot better.
More energy, but then it's just the opposite.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good question. Any other questions? Okay, so I think before I go into this, I would like to just make a note that the quality of your life is very important, and sugar can just be a very enjoyable thing sometimes, right? Like it can be nostalgic, it can help you be involved in social events. Like cutting out sugar entirely is impossible, and it's going to give you a poor quality of life. So that's not my intention behind the slide. It was just a question that you guys had. But you can have sugar sometimes. Like it's not going to be the end all be all thing that kills you. Now, why do you want to limit sugar? First and foremost, it's hyperpalatable. Okay. And hyperpalatable means it's chemically designed to make you want to eat more of it. So when you're eating the potato chips out of the bag, the reason you kill the whole bag in one serving is because it's designed to make you do that. So that you go back to the store and you buy another bag and then they're making money off of you. Right? That's literally how it works. And oftentimes that ends up leading us to eating a lot more. And when we eat a lot more, we get more calories in. And when you eat more calories, you gain weight because you're in a calorie surplus. Okay. Insulin resistance. Now, this can even be for people who are not diabetic. right? Insulin resistance is referring to your pancreas's inability to produce enough insulin for you. So when you consume so much sugar, your pancreas is releasing insulin every time you eat something sugary, and eventually your pancreas can't keep up with you. And that's what leads to things like being pre-diabetic or actually getting diagnosed with diabetes. So that's another reason why you want to be mindful of your sugar intake. Heart disease and blood pressure, same thing with kidney disease. A lot of people don't realize that all three of these are related. Oftentimes when we see patients in the hospital, they have all three. They don't normally just have one because they all play a role into each other. Now, for diabetes in particular, when you consume a lot of sugar and you build that insulin resistance and then you have to start taking an insulin pump and things like that, your blood streaming through your veins turns into like a thick molasses. It literally makes it thicker, right? So when it gets thicker, it's more likely to get clogged, right? Or more likely to cause something like a stroke. And then your kidneys are going to have a harder time filtering things out. So they all play a role in one another. So just something to be mindful of. Inflammation. Have you ever had like a weekend where you traveled and you just ate like anything and everything, and then you were up like 5 to 10 pounds on Monday and you felt like a giant water balloon? Yeah. That's why. You're at an increase in, honestly, even gout, beyond gout, you're at an increased risk for disease in general, right? Whether we're talking about diabetes, gout, the heart disease, the kidney failure, cancer, the whole 9 yards. So again, just something to be mindful of, okay? Your skin. A lot of the times teenagers are so frustrated, like, why do I have all this acne? I'm 15. Well, not only are you going through puberty, but you're living off of Takis, right? So a lot of the times it's your skin too that it can have an impact on. And also your mental health. Has anybody ever eaten better and realized that you were in such a better mood and you had a better attitude and it kind of literally changed your mental state? Food can totally impact that in a positive way or a negative way. Okay, so something to keep in mind. Cellular aging. Your lifestyle can totally change aging for you. Totally, right? Have you ever met somebody that was an older age and they told you your age and you're like, no way. Like you look like you're 40. How are you 65? Right? Chances are, unless they got Botox, chances are they took pretty good care of themselves, right? Like they ate a nutritious diet, they're active, they get their sleep and their rest. So something to definitely think about. And the draining energy comment, right? We had just talked about that right there with this question. When you consume a lot of carbohydrates, you get that crash, right? You ever come home from like when you ate out and you ate a really big meal and you literally fall asleep when you get home? Yeah, that's definitely that sugar crash. It can have an impact on your teeth, which most of you probably know, because if you have children and you're taking them to get their cavities fixed, it's because they can't stop with the candy. And it also can have an impact on like cognition, right? It can have an impact on your brain health. So talking about recommended sugar intake, I think in general, I don't recommend really tracking sugar, right? Because if you're tracking it on some form of an app, it's going to, like, you're going to eat a banana and then it's going to be like, oh God, you surpassed your sugar for the day, right? But we know that bananas give us lots of nutrients and benefits, whereas like if you're just living off of Takis, it's going to be a little bit different. So these are just general recommendations, but I wouldn't make yourself crazy about it. Okay, less than 10% of your calories in a day, right? And we just said the average person consumes about 2,000 calories per day. So we're looking at less than 50 grams. Honestly, if you eat a well-rounded diet and you enjoy your treats every once in a while, you're going to be fine. This is really not something to become super worried about. And the less than 200 calories a day. Now, if you think about like a cupcake, right? Chances are the cupcake's going to hit this 200 calories. However, that doesn't mean the cupcake is 100% sugar and all of those calories come from sugar, right? A lot of the times things like desserts and candies, it's carbs paired with fats, which is why it tastes so good. So I don't want you to be like, oh my God, I had a cupcake and I just ruined the whole day, because you didn't. Okay. Or 12 teaspoons, if that's an easier way to look at it. And if you pour out 12 teaspoons, it's quite a decent serving. So chances are most of you don't do that anyway, but just the general recommendations. Now, the American Heart Association would actually recommend half of the amount. So it's really, I think a lot of the times in nutrition, it depends. It depends on your own health background. It depends on like your sanity, right? Like, do you need a cupcake to keep you sane? And it just depends on your own personal situation. So again, these are very general, but something to just be mindful of. So this was a question you guys had. Sugar amounts in chocolate bars. Okay. So does anybody remember on the last slide how many teaspoons of sugar a day are recommended? Okay.
Sorry.
Just kidding. Yeah, well, it's 12. Okay. So most of these are going to give you about half. Maybe a little less, but most of them are going to give you about half. So like I said, even if you do have that cupcake or that candy bar, it's really not going to kill you. But it's something to be mindful of. And now that you know the recommended amount a day, this is something you can look at when you're buying food, right? You can end up like start looking at your food labels. Are there any questions about this?
What size are those? Like the small size?
These are the like not the small ones. They're going to be like the full ones.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Good question. Okay, now we're talking about soft drinks. What I'll say about soft drinks is that if you have to pick between regular and diet, I would recommend diet 7 days a week. Yeah? Love that for you.
One a day.
Yeah, a lot of the time people are super concerned that artificial sugars are going to give them cancer. The research is not up to date, and it's really not heavily supported. Basically, they gave mice an insane amount of aspartame. Like, and I'm talking like, we're talking insane amounts of Diet Coke. And most people do not consume that much artificial sugar in a day where it's actually going to give them cancer. So if you have to pick between regular and diet, I'd recommend diet all day. Are there any questions about diet pops or regular pops? Okay. And then these are just some of our common treats. Now, this is definitely going to be a little bit on the higher end of things in terms of like grams of sugar and something. But like I said, if you're enjoying it every once in a while, it's not going to kill you. I don't want you guys to go home and be like, well, the dietitian said that there's this much sugar in this, so I can't pick it up. I want you to live your life. And you have to, whatever type of regimen you follow on your own day-to-day basis, it has to be sustainable or you're never going to stick with it and it's pointless. And cutting all of this out for the rest of your life is not sustainable whatsoever. Okay, so let's talk about how your body's going to respond to like we're talking ultra processed foods, right? Because when you think about it, something like olive oil is technically processed, right? Like that came from an olive. So keep that in mind when people are talking about processed foods too. Like most of the foods, even the healthier stuff that you eat, is processed in some way. Like that mango didn't come from your backyard. It had to get here somehow, and it had to be sustained through a middleman and trucks and all kinds of stuff. So just keep that in mind. I think a lot of people like to be on TikTok like, oh, these chemicals, like don't touch any of them. There's chemicals in everything. So just keep that in mind. But the hyperpalatable concept that I talked about earlier, right? This food is made to make you eat more. So it's just something to be mindful of. So I think a lot of people are like, well, I'm addicted to sugar because when I eat one cookie, I want to eat 12. It's not that there's something wrong with you or you're broken or you're damaged. It's that it's literally designed to make you want to eat 12 more, right? So that's just something to be mindful of and being a little bit nicer to yourself. That's how they make money off of you. Dopamine, right? A lot of us eat a cookie and we are like immediately happier. That is not a coincidence, okay? There is going to be an actual chemical release of dopamine when you eat. This is a lot of the time why emotional eaters eat, because they're sad or they're angry or they're stressed. They put a cookie in their mouth and it's like, oh, I'm happy, right? So just something to keep in mind too, that hyper-processed foods are meant to make you happy. Go ahead, you can move on. Right? And that's why your brain, no, it's okay, you can stay there. That is why our brain seeks those things out, right? That's why we crave things, right? When it's like, oh God, I could really go for a cookie. Like, well, yeah, between it being hyper palatable and releasing dopamine, who wouldn't? Who wouldn't? It's like winning the lottery with one cookie in your mouth. So in terms of fat digestion, kind of like I talked about earlier, right? Like if you're eating butter or if you're eating Brazil nuts, your body's going to break it down the same way, because at the end of the day, it all comes down to like the chemical makeup of something, right? Now, fat digestion, as you can see, it doesn't start in your mouth. Okay, it's not going to start until we start getting all up in here. And again, your body knows what it's doing. And I think I just want you guys to start like trusting your body more, that whatever you do, it's going to take care of it. I think a lot of the times people want like a magic supplement that's going to do this for them. You don't need a supplement. Supplements didn't exist 100 years ago and people were just fine. So I think that's something to keep in mind too, is that like cavemen walked around and they speared a deer and made it work, right? Like they didn't have all these crazy extra things to make their body work. Your body knows what it's doing on its own. So I don't like the word good and bad for food ever, but this was just a really nice picture that I liked. But it's going to show us the difference between the two types of fats, right? So when you're thinking of the good fats, think of, they're called MUFAs and PUFAs, monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. And you're also thinking of your omega-3 fats, right? That's your fish oil that people can't stand taking because it makes them burp up fish, right? So that's going to be on this category of things, right? So we're thinking of fatty fish, our nuts and seeds, our nut butters, and different products like our soy and soybeans, okay? And when we're thinking of our fats that we want to just be more mindful of, really you're thinking of animal fats and like dessert fats, okay? That's really the easiest way to identify it. Like the grease you're getting off of your chicken, probably not your best bet, but trying to utilize things like olive oil when you're cooking is going to be more ideal. Are there any questions about the different fats?
I just got a question.
Sure.
What are considered and how much nuts, good nuts? Like I know they say almonds.
So I would say every nut's going to have a benefit, right? They're all going to contain different minerals and different components, right? So like almonds are going to have fiber in them. Great to get fiber from nuts. A lot of people make the argument that Brazil nuts are good for hormones. So it just kind of depends on what you're going for, but I would say a variety is going to be most ideal because then you're diversifying the vitamins and minerals that you're going to get. However, I would definitely follow the serving size on the package. Nuts are very calorie dense because fat is 9 calories per gram, which is like, it's just the highest calorie allotment. So if you're going to eat this huge bag of nuts, you're going to be consuming hundreds, if not thousands of calories. So if the serving size is 28 grams or a quarter cup, then you're going to want to follow the serving size. Does that answer that question? Okay. Any other questions? So in terms of fat recommendations, right? So we're looking at between 20 and 35% of your calories. I would say for both carbs and fats, it's kind of personal preference which end of the range you're going to be on, right? Some people prefer more carbs and a little less fats, right? So then you'd fall in the 20% end, or vice versa. If you prefer kind of a more fatty diet, then you're going to go a little more towards the 35%. However, my own personal recommendation, don't go under 50 grams a day. Fats are going to, so think about your fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. They're fat soluble. They cannot be carried throughout your body without you having fat. So a lot of the time when people are on a super low fat diet, they become deficient in those vitamins, right? Same thing, that fat is important for sex hormone synthesis. A lot of the times when bodybuilders are on a super low fat diet, they get what's called amenorrhea, which is the loss of your menstrual cycle, for this exact reason, not having enough fat intake. Okay, so something to just keep in mind. Now, if we're looking at saturated fats, saturated and trans fats are the two fats you're trying to be aware of and reduce. Okay, again, that's your animal fat and your pastry fat. And you want it to be about 10% of your calories in a day. Okay, no, that's okay. So you guys had sent in pictures of your meals. Now, I would like you to keep in mind, this is just, again, general recommendations based off what I saw in these pictures, but I'll go through each picture. And if you have a question, I would definitely raise your hand and let me know. Okay. Go ahead. Okay. First thing here, right? Okay. So we have the salmon. You have your protein source. So you're covered there, right? And your protein source, you want it to be about the size of your palm. So I would say that's a pretty decent portion. Okay. And then we have the polenta. Now, from what I know about polenta, it's going to be a little bit more carb dense. So the thing that's missing here to me is the colors. Like, where are the vegetables here, right? I would want to see like green, red, orange, something. We want to see a little bit more color. But overall, I would say the portion of the protein and the portion of the carb are fine. It's just that we're missing that color piece on this end. Okay. Now, when we're going here, okay, we're looking at avocado toast. So the toast is going to be your whole grain, right? That's where you're going to get your fiber from, and that's where your carb source is coming from. And the avocado is going to be your fruit and or vegetable. People argue that it's one or the other. However, we're missing like a protein source, right? You're going to get a little bit of protein from the carb, from the bread, but I would argue that you want like a full protein serving in a meal, right? So you could add smoked salmon, you can add an egg on top, you can add turkey on top, you can even just drink a protein shake if you don't want anything on your toast. But I would say that meal in particular is missing a protein source. Okay. Now, when we're looking at the rice cake with the applesauce, technically that's 2 servings of carbohydrates, right? Applesauce is carbohydrates, rice cake is carbohydrate. So we're missing a fruit and vegetable, and we're missing a protein source. So again, you would want to get creative and think of like, okay, how can I add a protein into this meal, right? And you could argue that the applesauce is the fruit, right? But you would want to add some kind of a protein source there and or a fat source. So now we're coming down here looking at the shake. So you're going to have your non-fat Greek yogurt, okay? That's going to be where you're going to get a little bit of carb and a fair amount of protein from. So that's great. And berries are great. I would argue berries are on the high end of being one of the most nutritionally beneficial families of the fruits. They're super dense in antioxidants. They're very high in fiber. So I think in terms of getting in some protein with a little bit of carb and then getting in the berries, that's great. If you wanted to add more to get more like nutrients, more calories out of it, you could, but arguably that's pretty good. And then when we're looking here at a 0 sugar creamer with a 0 sugar additive, if your stomach can handle 0 sugar things and like a lot of aspartame or sugar alcohols, then go for it. Something to be mindful of is it can cause loose stools, like too much sugar alcohol can make you go to the bathroom. And sometimes too much like artificial sugar can cause a headache. But other than that, that's fine. I will say coffee in general, you want to eat a full meal before you drink your cup of coffee. And I know people hate that. When I tell them that, they're like, Paige, I can't do that. I'm like, well, you're going to have to figure it out because you're going to want to eat a full meal. Okay. And if you're not used to it, start with like a banana or something, but ideally you'd eat before drinking your coffee. And then in terms of this meal down here, believe it or not, we're missing a carb, right? So this is the vegetable aspect, wonderful. Protein aspect, wonderful. You need that carbohydrate, right? Whether it be pasta or rice or something of that matter. I would add that to this meal. It would make it more satiating. And then, of course, you're getting the benefits from the carbs like we talked about earlier. Yes.
Back to the creamer
Yeah.
and the coffee. You're saying those sweetened creamers, the flavored ones, will cause a headache?
It depends on how much you consume. But no, you're not like guaranteed to have a headache. No. It depends on your tolerance. Like for someone myself, like she had said, she loves Diet Coke. I love that kind of stuff in my coffee, so I can tolerate a pretty large amount. But I think for people who are not used to it, and if they switch to everything sugar-free, they might get a headache.
Okay, and then why are you saying full meal before you have a cup of coffee?
Great question. So when you wake up in the morning, what gets you out of bed literally is cortisol, right? The stress hormone wakes you up. And then throughout the day, it starts to trend down. When you wake up and you're eating a cup of coffee off of an empty stomach, one, not friendly to your stomach at all, right? Coffee's not easy on the stomach. There's so many memes about like the coffee poops, and it's totally a real thing. Secondly, it's going to negatively impact your cortisol levels. It's going to make them spike even higher, and high amounts of a cortisol hormone are not great. It's not good for your blood sugar either, because when we have high amounts of stress and high amounts of cortisol, that makes our blood sugar higher. So if you're waking up empty stomach and you're drinking coffee, your sugars are going to go up. Does that answer that question? Okay.
I have a question. So overall, if this is a day of eating, too much, too little, what's your?
Oh, that's a great question. If this is a full day of eating, I would probably say it's not enough. My guesstimation based off just literally looking at the screen is anywhere between like 1,200 to 1,500 calories a day. And I would say that's definitely not enough, especially for like a grown woman. On top of the fact that if you're exercising, yeah, it's definitely not enough.
Another one.
Yeah.
The cortisol level and stress.
Mm-hmm.
If the cortisol levels are high, do you crave more like a certain something, carbs or?
It's a good question. So when your cortisol levels,
So
okay. So when your cortisol levels are getting super high, your cortisol is released from your adrenal glands. Okay. And when you start to release too much cortisol, it's going to start impacting like other glands, right? So it's going to start impacting your thyroid gland and your pituitary gland, which are then going to kind of pour into creating a whole hodgepodge of problems, right? Underactive thyroid, producing, not enough progesterone. Maybe you have too much estrogen. Maybe you don't produce enough testosterone, whatever the case may be. But normally it starts to kind of spiral into a whole nother whirlwind of issues. In terms of being a stress eater, in a general sense, I would just say that that hyperpalatable food or that carb is going to release that dopamine, and that you're just seeking the dopamine. It's not necessarily that like the cortisol is making you want food. Does that make sense?
no, sorry.
That's okay. I'm trying to think. What part is confusing? Like the stress eating part or the cortisol part?
Cortisol part. If your cortisol, or I can't say the word.
That's okay.
If it's high,
Mm-hmm.
does that mean that you're holding on to like fat in your body, or?
Correct. Too much cortisol produced can cause fat gain or retention. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
But because I'm stressed eater, the cortisol, you retain that in your body, you're saying from the fat?
So your adrenal glands release cortisol. So I wouldn't think necessarily about the cortisol hormone. I would think more so about the impact of stress in general.
I guess then, stop what we're eating and then when
Like, how would you stop stress eating?
craving that, because with having the high cortisol, we are craving that, craving that to eat. I don't know.
Yeah, so
And that's my biggest thing. When I first came in, I mentioned that. And Lisa? Yeah. Yeah,
I could eat a whole cheesecake.
I could eat, yeah.
so oh, stress eating is a whole nother animal, which we can definitely talk about in an entire hour for sure.
And,
Here's what I'll say.
I feel good eating it, and then afterwards I don't, but it's.
Well, yeah,
I can't
right.
stop.
Right.
And when I have those moments, so how do we lower the high cortisol that then we won't crave it as much? Is that a possibility, or,
It's
I don't-
not it is not the cortisol hormone that is causing you to eat
Oh.
more. It is your own response to the stress release, right? Because some people get stressed out and don't eat at all. So it's more of that is your way of coping. And I think to keep this short for today,
Okay.
I would say you have to find a way to pause before you get there, right? So my best advice would be to look into what's called grounding techniques. Grounding techniques are what's going to cause a physical response that help you get back into your what we call window and allow you to make more of a conscious decision, right? Because chances are that you're so overstimulated, you're not consciously thinking, and your body and mind's number one goal is how can I relax and get a happy pill,
Yeah.
right? And that's why that entire cheesecake, every time it hits your mouth, the digestion process starts and then the dopamine gets released every single time. So it's not about reducing a cortisol level. It's about coping, how you cope and how you kind of muddle through when that spike happens. But yeah, that would be my general answer. But yeah, I would look into like different ways to cope with the stress, right? And I'll tell you right now, just as a general thing to anybody, don't try to like become Gandhi and start like meditating in a position. That's really like kind of far beyond. I would try to grab a simple, easy and quick, convenient coping mechanism that's going to at least relax you enough to where you can consciously make a decision rather than trying to like completely
Such as.
no, that's okay. So
I don't want to put you on the spot.
no, you're fine. You're fine.
Examples such as.
So if you go into your pantry because you're about to grab your Doritos, lay down on the floor. Get on the floor. But you can, because when you're laying down, then you have a moment of like, okay, like what am I doing? Right? Like then it gives you a chance to pause and think and breathe and kind of think about, okay, this is what I'm feeling and how can I meet that need in a different way? How can I cope with that in another way? Or if you're reaching into your freezer for ice cream, grab an ice cube. And you can't make a move until it melts in your hand. Gotta pause. Then you're standing there holding ice cubes, kind of like, okay, what am I doing right now? I don't want to eat that entire cheesecake because I'm not going to feel good afterward. So then what else can I do? Right? Sometimes you just gotta breathe it out, kind of like, all right, hold on. Let's like breathe for 10 seconds, right? So there's a lot of different ways that you can do that, but I think those are probably my two favorites is like getting on the ground or sometimes even like stepping outside, right? Like the fresh air hits your face and you're kind of like looking at nature and you're a little distracted.
I can see my husband, what are you doing on the ground?
Yeah. He won't know.
Yeah.
Does that answer that question?
Get over and help me up. He said, get over and help me up.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? That was a great question.
All right, we have one more daily meal to share. Oh, shoot.
That's okay.
Let me get back to that. Oh, come on. Technology.
That's
What's
okay.
your thoughts on soy?
Newer research would argue that soy can actually be better